everyone! Today's tutorial is going to be a festive Halloween blouse. We are definitely in full swing for October, and this is my favorite month, so I'm trying to do a bunch of projects. Hopefully I can get them all done for you guys, but this is the first very easy one. I'm sure you've noticed this is one of my recently pulled patterns if you watch my pattern haul reviews, and I really wanted to put this one together. So I thought this would be a great fun little project to do, whether you're going to work or school or you're a teacher. This is the perfect way to add that Halloween element to your wardrobe without being a little too out there. But this way you can celebrate it every day of the month in the perfect subtle way. I'm using the McCall's 7956. I will be using a Halloween cotton fabric, so I pre-washed my fabric before cutting it out. And the bias tape I made my own just to make things easy, and that way I had something that matched my fabric. I will be doing mine in a size 18, and I will be doing view C. I will need pattern pieces 1 through 5, so a very easy pattern to put together with not too many pieces, so this will be short and sweet. So the first thing we want to do is add all of the dots and notches and placement lines and mark them with our tailor chalk or fabric pencil. Starting with the front facing and back facing, we're going to add the inner facing to the back of each piece. Going to the back of my bodice, we're going to start doing the darts. So I'm going to start with the middle 2 dots first. And there you can see the top one. Taking a sewing needle, I'm going to place it in the middle of the 2 dots, connecting them. Pinch my fabric together. Then I'm going to pinch the top dot, and there I have this little fold or pleat. And I'm going to put my sewing pin through this, angling it toward that top dot. I'm going to pinch that bottom one and then the middle, so I have another little pleat, and once again I'll place sewing pins along this line as well, so you can see the angle that you're going to be sewing in. Do this to the other dart on the back, and then the same thing on the front bodice piece, going through those 2 dots on the side, and then pinching the inner dot to create your dart. Sew these down at these angles on the front and back bodice. So you can see I'm starting at that top middle dot and I'm angled toward the bottom 2 dots. And I'm just going to sew straight on through. And on the back piece, same thing, you want to start at the top middle inner dot, angled toward those 2 center dots. And then on this one, I'm just going to rotate slightly to angle back toward the bottom dot. So it kind of makes like a very narrow diamond in a way. Iron the pleats on the front bodice piece down toward the bottom. And the darts on the back toward the middle. Grab your front bodice piece and lay it right sides together with the back, matching the sides. Pin the side seams together, and then you're also going to pin the shoulder seams together. Do this to the other side. Sew these with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Open up the seams and iron them open. Taking the back neck facing piece and the front facing pieces, line up the shoulder seams right sides together and pin them in place. Then sew this with the 5/8 inch seam allowance. Iron open these seams as well. Taking our bodice and our lining, we're going to lay them right sides together, and we're going to line up the neckline edge as well as the front openings. And then you can use the corners and the seams to help line everything up. Sew this on with the 5/8 inch seam allowance. So to give you an example of what I do when I get to that first corner, I just sew straight on through, and then I just flip it around and start sewing the new direction. When I get to the second inner corner, I'm going to sew in 5/8 inches, and I kind of eye this, but you can measure. I'm going to lift my presser foot, rotate the fabric to the new direction, lower my presser foot, and continue sewing. Cut off the inner corners on that front neckline corner. And then you're also going to cut into the corners diagonally, but make sure you don't cut past the thread. This will help when we turn it out later. Then I'm going to add a few clips to the curve of the neckline just by cutting out a few little triangles about 1 inch apart. Same thing, don't cut past the thread. Open up the facing, and we're going to line the seam allowance toward the facing and pin this down. The corners are going to be a little tricky on this next part, so pinning does help a little bit. We're going to top stitch this down at a 1/8 inch seam allowance. So I'm going to start sewing, and I'm just going to try my best to get as close into that corner as I possibly could. It really doesn't have to be perfect. You can see I'm kind of struggling a little bit. Just make sure you have everything laid out flat and that you don't have any other fabrics getting underneath that you don't notice that you're sewing into the stitch by accident. So I'm just going to go as far as I can, and then I'll start again on the other side of that corner. As close as I can to it, I'll just continue sewing out of it. So like I said, doesn't have to be perfect. I have a pair of pinging shears, and they have this little zigzag edge to them. So this blouse I will not be wearing regularly, so I'm going to finish off my seams a different way today to give you another take on how to do this in case you don't want to do a zigzag stitch or you don't have a serger to use to finish these ends. And what this does is it just keeps the fabric from fraying. So this is going to be perfect for just one of those quick projects you need to get done quickly and you don't plan to wear very often. So I'm just going to do this all around my edges, and then I'm also going to cut off some of that edge of the seam allowance as well. Fold the facing back into your bodice. And then we're going to iron this in place. Going to the sleeves, we're going to add a gathering base stitch between the 3 top dots. Start with a 3 to 4 inch tail of thread, and then starting at the first outer small dot, I'm going to sew a 1/8 inch seam allowance all the way to the third small dot. Leave a tail of thread at the end, and then do the same exact thing at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Turn your sleeves right sides together, matching up the short ends. Pin them together. Sew these at a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Iron open the seams here again. Turn your sleeve right side out. We're going to hem up the bottom, so fold up the edge 3/8 inches and iron it down all the way around. Then I'm going to fold over another 3/8 inches, ironing this down all the way around. Turn your sleeve inside out. And then I'm going to sew this seam down at a 3/8 inch seam allowance or just before the edge. Do this to the other sleeve as well. Going to the seam allowance, I'm going to sew the sides down about 1 inch length right across the placement line. And I'm going to sew this with a base stitch so that we can remove it later on. Take your bias strip and we're going to add this to the placement line around the sleeve. We're going to sew down each side as close as we can to the edge. On the ends, you're going to fold it under so you have a nice finished edge, and that edge is going to line up with the middle of that seam. And you want to fold the other end the same way so that they meet in the middle. So here I'm starting with my folded over edge in the middle of the seam. And just start sewing it down as close to that edge as you can. I'm going to cut off my excess bias tape, making sure it hangs over about 1/2 inch. And I'm going to fold this under to line it up in the middle as well, finishing my stitch. And then just sew down the opposite side. Grab your elastic and you're going to measure your arm. Whatever measurement you have, add 1 inch. So mine is 11.5 and then I'm adding 1 inch, so 12.5 inches. And you're going to cut 2 pieces of these. Grab a safety pin and put it through one end of your elastic. Then we're just going to use this to help thread the elastic through the channel that we've created. Once you get to the other end, remove your safety pin. Overlap the ends about 1 inch. And then you're going to do a back and forth stitch about 3 or 4 times in 2 spots so that your elastic is secure. Pull on your sleeve so that the elastic gets tucked back inside. Turn your sleeve right side out once again. Grab your bodice, and going to the sleeve, you'll notice that you've made those 2 notch marks on one side and a 1 notch mark on the other. So you're going to use these to match it to the armholes on the bodice. Tuck your sleeve inside the armhole, and I'm going to start by matching the bottom seams and then the top middle dot on the sleeve to the shoulder seam. Then I'm going to go around matching the straight edges first on both sides. When I get to the gathers, I'm going to pull the top 2 threads to gather up this sleeve, and I'm pulling it up enough to line up perfectly with the armhole on both sides. Once I have the size that I need, I'm going to pin it in place. And once I've done this to both sides, then I will move around the gathers to distribute them evenly. And we're going to sew these on at a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Once again, I'm going to use my pinking shears to finish off the edge, but you can do a serge or zigzag stitch as well. Going back to the inner facing at the bottom of the bodice, fold it back over with right sides together and pin this down. I'm going to grab my ruler and I'm going to mark 1 1/4 inches above the bottom edge. I'm going to sew this, creating a line at that 1 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm going to cut off this little square of extra fabric, and then going to the bottom, we're going to hem this up. So I'm going to start by folding it over 3/8 inches, ironing it down all the way across. And then I'm going to fold it up again at 5/8 inches, ironing this down all the way across. So at this point, it should line up with that seam in the facing. I'm going to cut off a corner of this extra fabric. Don't cut past your thread, but this will help us as we turn these corners out so that you have a nice sharp corner. You can use a pencil or chopstick to help poke this out. And then I'm going to take my iron and press this facing in place. Sew down the bottom at a 5/8 inch seam allowance or just before the edge. Going to the shoulder seams, I'm going to slip stitch this down to the seam allowance to hold the facing in place. And then I will also slip stitch the opening of the elastic on the sleeve closed on both sides. Next, sew on your buttonholes, and I have a video showing how to do this with your machine and with the buttonhole foot, and I will link that video down below for you. But here I'm just going to add my buttonhole foot, and I'm going to line it up to my buttonhole, and my machine pretty much does all the work. Once I have my buttonhole, I'm going to grab my seam ripper, and I'm going to place it in the middle and cut it open a little bit, and then I'll grab some scissors and finish opening the hole up. And then I'm going to go back and sew on all of my buttons. I decided to be a little fun with this, and I'm sewing this on with some orange thread just to give it a little bit of contrast. I really love this fabric that I happened to find on a fabric destashing site, and I just happened to have exactly the amount I needed. So it was calling me to be made. All I gotta do is throw on a nice skirt, a witch hat, and I've got a perfect costume right there. So if you're in the last minute bind and you need something quick, this is a great little project to put together. It shouldn't take you more than a few hours. Most of the time, the longest part is cutting out the pattern pieces anyways. But hopefully this gives you just a little bit of idea on how you can take a normal blouse and just put a little spin or twist on it so that you can have something a little more fun to wear. If you like this video, hit the like button and subscribe if you have not done so already. Make sure you hit the bell so that you get notified when I upload my videos. Halloween costume videos are coming up soon, so I hope to see you then. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!